Thanks very much. It was actually it's a good point raising the my experience at university with Stuart and the TV Society. When I look back on it, when I went to university in 1968, now I'm going to give you some history today. When I went to university in 1968, there were only 2 universities in Scotland offering degrees in computer science. And so I looked at the syllabus for the other one, which was St Andrews, and it looked to me like a very thinly disguised applied maths course. So I went to Heriot Watt and discovered that when I got there, it was also a very thinly disguised applied maths course. Computer science was really done as an offshoot of the maths department in those days. So there are actually people who graduated in computer science at the same time as me from Edinburgh, because they started doing general science that year and then switched into computing. But 68, there was only 2 computer science courses offered in Scotland, and I went to Heriot Watt. And I spent most of my time at Heriot Watt, at least for the first 3 years. My final year I gave up and concentrated on my studies, but most of my course time I spent a lot of time in the TV Society. And that was by far the best education I'd ever got. I learned how to budget, how to manage teams, how to schedule things, how to deliver projects. I mean, you know, you learn a lot when you're running a complex society. And when I look back at it, I learned much more in the TV Society than I ever learned in my class. But then, this is the factor of computer science. The half-life of your knowledge is about 5 years. So 5 years after you've learned something, half of it's irrelevant in this particular area because it just all moves on. So the half-life of my knowledge I got in 1974 is probably 0.01 or something % now. Okay, right, so a bit of a history story. I wanted to tell you, we don't really talk about history very much in computing. And we should do more. In fact, I've just come back. I was in Silicon Valley last week and I went to the Computer History Museum. If any of you are ever in Silicon Valley, Mountain View, the Computer History Museum is a miraculous place. It's really fantastic. It goes right back. They've got a Babbage difference engine that works, you know, and you can watch it working right all the way through. And it covers the world. So it covers the Cambridge work and the Bletchley Park work and everything. It's not just American. It's a very, very comprehensive museum. And because computing is relatively recent, there's contemporary recordings of all these people, these pioneers, and you can see them on the little screens, you know, effectively doing a Q&A with you. You can ask them questions and they give you the standard answers. So history is quite important, I think, and you've got to remember that, and you know, for your perspective, it will be difficult to think of this, but when Stuart and I went to university, actually Heriot Watt didn't have a computer, you know. We had to punch our programs onto punch cards and send them off to Stirling and get them back the next day. So, you know, a university doing computer science course that didn't actually have a computer, that was, you know, a bit odd. But in those days, of course, computers were, you know, very, very underpowered. I mean, today, you know, you've got massive more power in your smartphone in your pocket than we ever had at the time. And very poor interfaces. Very little in the way of graphic interfaces. It was all pretty much, well, the interface was a bunch of punch cards. So, you know, it's very, very different times. And in those days, computing was very much for processing orders or accounting or, you know, scheduling things or so forth. It wasn't really, personal computing wasn't really a concept that existed in the late 60s. So, to some extent, I'm going to talk about the development of personal computing. And the biggest application on personal computing that we all know today, because we all use them every day, is the web, which is really dynamic documentation or hypertext. And so that's the area I'm going to concentrate on. So I'm going to start with, well, this is, first of all, why is this not working? Because I haven't switched it on. I have switched it on. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of history on where the web technology came from. And then, because I've noticed this afternoon you're going on to do entrepreneurial stuff, I'll do a wee bit on being an entrepreneur, what that means in Scotland, and how it's really a very practical choice, especially nowadays. When I started my business 30 years ago, it was quite an unusual thing to do. Nowadays, there's a lot of people doing really quite great things in Scotland. Anyway, back to the history. So way back in 1945, this is a copy of Life magazine. In fact, I've got the copy here. I bought this magazine in a sort of, you know, old bookstore in the States, and it was wrapped in plastic and had a label on it, and that was what I had in the label. The articles in this magazine, it said, US occupies Japan. This is just after the end of the war. Auto worker profile, French look, fashion, and so forth. It doesn't actually, the label on this pack, when I bought it, didn't actually mention an article that's inside. And the article is called As We May Think, by a guy called Vannevar Bush. Now I think Vannevar Bush in this article, As We May Think, is arguably the most significant computer science article in the 20th century. This is Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was the chief scientific advisor to President Roosevelt in the Second World War. So he was the chief scientific advisor to the US government, responsible for things like the Manhattan Project to develop the H-bomb and so forth. He was a professor from MIT. He did actually, he was pretty much in the technology forefront of his age. And he wrote this article. He actually wrote it, first of all, for a magazine called Atlantic Monthly, which is still going. And that was the June 1945 issue of Atlantic Monthly. And the article, As We May Think, talks about how the world is going to be transformed by technology. Now the war's over, we're going to see massive changes, and technology is going to be the forefront of all this. But the most spectacular thing he does in As We May Think is he describes the way in which literature, like information, should be managed in the post-war era. He talks about this, this computer, the thinking machine. Now remember, at that time, computers didn't really exist. Vannevar Bush was one of the few people who knew, probably one of about 20 people in the world who knew about the Colossus work at Bletchley Park, and some of the work that had been done at Philadelphia and MIT at the time in computing. And at the very, very early stages of computing, no computer stored programs at that time, for example. There was very limited processing. The Colossus machine did actually do electronic calculation using valves for switching and so forth, but you couldn't actually effectively program it. So this was very, very early stuff. So he went on to talk about this, this computer, and of course that picture he put, in fact, the Life magazine artists, they got the article from Atlantic Monthly, which didn't have illustrations, and they illustrated it. So they put the pictures in of the, there's the one of the, there, that's the picture of the computer. And it does look a bit like a computer did in the sort of 50s and 60s. So he was speculating on the computer. He speculated that we'd all we'd begin to wear these little cameras in our head so that when we're looking at stuff, we could photograph it. Sort of Google Glass type concept, really. I know Google Glass hasn't quite made it, but the Google Glass concept is you record your life as you're going through it, you record all your meetings and so forth. The other thing he said was this dictation machine. So instead of typing, you would speak into the machine and it would take down your dictation. Of course, we've got that now, Drag and Dictate and so forth. I've done that for many years. But the main thing he was talking about in this article, and it's a phenomenon, it's well worth reading. It's available online. You can easily get a hold of it. He's talking about the way we use information. And I suppose, because he was in charge of the Manhattan Project, a bit like CERN, a lot of physicists working hard together, which is interesting because CERN later comes into play in the hypertext story. But with a lot of physicists working intensively together, they have to share information very, very quickly, particularly the Manhattan Project had a very specific issue in that you had to see the information being developed by others very, very quickly, and it also had to be completely secure. So nobody outside the group should be able to see it. So that's very interesting. You have to get information very quickly around a group of people, and then also, you have the security of doing that. And he pointed to the way in which systems worked at the time. And he said there are methods of transmitting and reviewing the results of research, and generations old and totally inadequate for their purposes. And he's talking about scientific papers, really. So you go into a library, a major university library, and you've got racks and racks of scientific papers. And where do you start? And obviously, you look at indexes and so forth, card indexes. You go to the first article, you see something that's got a citation for another article. You go down, you find that article, you bring it out. That's got a citation for another article you want to read. You go and find that and so forth. So this is the way in which information is managed. But unless things are really very well indexed, you're not going to find all the bits you want. And it's also going to take a lot of shoe leather going up and down all these stacks and stacks of journals and so forth. So what Bush was saying is the methods of doing all this research and accessing all this research is totally inadequate. The human mind, he said, operates by association. It doesn't actually operate this way. With one item in its grasp, it snaps instantly to the next. It's suggested by the association of thoughts, in accordance with some intricate web of trails carried by the cells of the brain. Whenever logical processes of thought are employed, there's an opportunity for a machine. So what Bush did is he said, consider a future device. This is an imaginary machine that's not been invented yet, okay? A future device for individual use, which is a sort of mechanized private file and library. And this is it, the Memex. And the Life magazine artists drew up a Memex by the sort of description given in Vannevar Bush. Now, Vannevar Bush, he thought that the machine would do the switching, would do the managing from place to place and so forth. He didn't actually envisage the machine would actually store the documents themselves. He thought that would be microfilm. So these two displays are microfilm displays. So these are pages of scientific papers in his visualization of this. And I guess that's probably because in that time, you know, storage was very expensive. So the thought that you could have storage that could store libraries full of data, of articles and things, was really way out of his reach. But he did speculate that you could do this, connecting up all these documents and so forth. And the Memex, he goes on to describe it, and it's a spooky, I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. He's describing the web. You know, this is 1945. When the user is building a trail, he names it. Before him, the two items that are joined, projected onto adjacent viewing positions. The user taps a single key, and the two items are permanently joined. So you've created a link, hypertext link. Thereafter, at any time when one of these items is in view, the other can be instantly recalled merely by tapping a button. Most of the contents are purchased, ready for insertion, books of all sorts, pictures, current periodical, newspapers obtained, drop into place. If the user inserted 5,000 pages of material a day, it would take hundreds of years to fill the depository. Wholly new forms of encyclopedia will appear, ready-made with a host of associated trails running through them. I mean, this is, you know, Wikipedia. The lawyer would have at his touch opinions and decisions. The physician, puzzled by patients' reactions, strikes a trail established in studying an earlier similar case. The historian follow at any time contemporary trails which lead him all over civilization. So that was Vannevar Bush, and just an extraordinary presence of what could happen. I mean, the web came in 1995, 50 years later. So he was describing with incredible accuracy what we really needed, of what machines could do. And it was extraordinary. However, it was very much a theoretical, I mean, it was a futuristic article. One of the people who read this article is this guy, Doug Engelbart. I don't know if any of you heard of Doug Engelbart? Yeah, a few of the old hands have heard of Doug Engelbart. Doug Engelbart is an absolute pioneer. I mean, Doug Engelbart invented the personal computer, no question about it. All the aspects of personal computer he did. Doug Engelbart was he was an Air Force officer in the Second World War, and he read Vannevar Bush's article in Atlantic Monthly in a library in the Far East, and it changed his life. He says he was inspired by it, and he really thought, this is, you know, we could do this. We can build this sort of information machine, and create this sort of comprehensive. Now, you know, computers obviously. Well, first of all, when he read the article, computers hadn't been invented, but it came to the 60s. Engelbart was working at the Stanford Research Institute near Stanford University, Silicon Valley, and he had the opportunity to put this into place. And so he developed a whole bunch of technologies and techniques which allowed this to happen. He developed the first graphic user interface. So this is a computer with graphics as well as text. He developed the first mouse carved out of wood. He developed the whole hypertext storage and retrieval area. He also pioneered in networking communications. I met Engelbart. He came to speak at a conference in Edinburgh in '94 that I chaired, and he came to my house, actually. It was lovely to have him. And he was going back in '94. He was going back to the celebration of 25 years of ARPANET, because Stanford Research Institute was the second node in the ARPANET. Well, you know, you don't really have a net unless you've got two nodes, so that was pretty significant. And also, he did some work on teleconferencing as well. Now, let me just put this up.
The research program that I'm going to describe to you is quickly characterizable by saying, if in your office you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display, backed up by a computer that was alive for you all day and was instantly responsive, instantly responsive to every action you had. How much value could you derive from that? Well, this basically characterizes what we've been pursuing for many years in what we call the Augmented Human Intellect Research Center at Stanford Research Institute. But there's another thing I can do. There's a route I said I have here. So here, I'm afraid I'll need a different picture of the view. So here's what I drew with a picture drawing capability here. It's a slight map if I start from work, and here's the route I seem to have to go to pick up all the materials. And that's my plan for getting home tonight. But if I want to, I can say, the library, what am I supposed to pick up there? I can just point to that, and oh, I see, overdue books, and only I can see it. So these ways I move around, the way I get feedback up here, the way I use both hands to coordinate to tell the computer what command and what short literals I want, are all carefully designed to go together to make the repertoire. I'd like to link to Bill. Before I can do that, I have to set up my display in a certain way. Set it up so I see it over like that. That leaves a corner up there, and I say, now computer, do the automatic switching that'll bring in a camera picture from the camera mounted on his console, such as the camera mounted on mine is. Hi, Bill. That's great. Now we're connected audio. You can see my work, you can point at it, and I can see your face, and we can talk. So let's do some collaborating.
So that was amazing stuff, absolutely fantastic stuff, and really a breakthrough in using technology in completely new ways. But of course, a computer in those days cost, $10 million. So it's not exactly practical to give people a computer as a personal computer, that sort of situation. As we go forward, some people sort of developed these ideas. A guy called Ted Nelson wrote a book called Literary Machines and Computer Lab and Dream Machines and so forth. And he was very much a futurist, really not so much a technologist. In fact, his parents were in the movie industry. But he was very vocal and very strong in describing the whole area of how technology would take on literature. And literature would begin to be, nowadays we're all used to iPads. Effectively, it's there, it's an online magazine, with all the magazines in the world on it and so forth. But we didn't think of that sort of thing. So Ted Nelson was the guy in the early 80s who kind of started to develop this idea of literary machines and how machines would start to deliver these sort of things. And Ted Nelson's mostly known for coining the word hypertext. So hypertext is the technology, the name for the technology, and Ted came up with that name. Ted had this dream of his system we called Xanadu, and Xanadu would be the one global system that would manage all this documentation and present it to you so you can all interact with it and so forth. And funnily enough, when that arrived with the web, Ted didn't like the web very much. So Ted and the web have never really seen eye to eye. He still thinks we should go back to his original Xanadu idea. I must say, I can't actually see quite what the problem is. But anyway, that was Ted. The sort of time when this began to really arrive in terms of being usable was the sort of 80s, when scientific workstations were beginning to come in. Nowadays all our computers look like workstations, with graphics and mice and so forth. But until really the 80s, machines didn't have a graphics screen at all, didn't have windows and so forth. So that began to appear in the 80s. And there were 3 machines in the world which did this stuff. There was the Apollo machine, the Sun machine, and the PERC machine. The PERC machine was picked up by the UK Science Research Council, and they recommended that scientific researchers in the UK use the PERC computer. And they got ICL to work with the company that developed the PERC in the States and deliver it to the UK education system. In fact, I got a job in ICL of running the PERC project. So that was my first experience of working with Americans and so forth and this type of thing. But one of the people who had access to perks, and they had a room full of perks, was this guy, Peter Brown. Peter Brown was a professor at the University of Kent in Canterbury. In fact, I went to see Heather Brown, his wife, when I started my company in 1984. We started our company, we decided we were going to do documentation systems. We'd been running the perk in ICL, so we understood this concept of a graphics-oriented computer with a mouse and windows and so forth. But we were very, very few people understood this properly. And so we decided to form a company. We called the company Office Workstations Limited because the workstation at that time was a scientific thing, and we were going to bring it into the office. And we really speculated that the world would adopt this type of computing. And we started the company, I say, in 1984. In fact, in 1984 was the year the Apple Macintosh was launched. And you probably know the Apple Macintosh was the first WYSIWYG, really personal computer. So Peter Brown had access to these perks. And he was, I remember when I went to see Heather Brown to talk about she was chairman of the BCS Electronic Publishing Specialist Group at the time. So I went to talk to her about technology for electronic publishing. And we said to her, who in the UK is doing interesting work in electronic publishing? And she said, nobody much. She said, I'll give you some names of people in the States. So we got names of Brainard, who was doing PageMaker and so forth. So we followed those up. Adobe, who were doing the laser printer and these sort of things. So we followed that up and went to speak to these sort of people. But she said, while you're here, she said, you might want to talk to Peter, my husband. He's been working on this area he calls dynamic documentation. And so we actually had 10 minutes because he was going to have to give a lecture. And so we went to see him for 10 minutes, and he told us about this. He said, look, the perk has got, it's got the manuals, it's got Unix on it, and it's got manuals that describe how the system works, and the manuals are online. He says, but if you look at people using the perk, they're forever pulling the manuals off the shelf, the paper version, and looking at the paper version of the manuals. And that's because the online version is so difficult to search, so difficult to access. It's difficult to find your way through the documents and so forth. So Peter had developed this idea of what he called dynamic documentation, which was a way of presenting these documents in a new way, an interactive way. He didn't even know it was called hypertext at the time. So you got documents up, you clicked on a button, and it did something. It usually expanded. So effectively, the way Peter had structured his hypertext dynamic documents is when you got to a document, you basically got the contents page. And when you clicked on each of the contents, it just expanded out and rolled down. So you could very, very quickly go from place to place in a document. And so he developed this dynamic documentation concept. And my colleague and I, after seeing this, we were on the plane back to Edinburgh, and we're talking to each other and going, that was really cool. That was really interesting. By that time, we were beginning to discover that our document management system that we were building as in our new company was going to get overwhelmed, going to get absolutely swamped by well-funded American companies that were doing these sort of things. And this was something different. Nobody was doing this. This was quite unique. And so we thought, well, yeah, maybe we should do something about this. So we got a license to develop it. I gave it to my best engineer. And he, on his own, developed the Apple Macintosh version of our product. The product was called Guide, a hypertext product that anybody could use. And it was, relatively cheap. You could actually put it on your Mac and you could run it and so forth. So that was Guide Hypertext for the 86, for the Mac. 1987, sorry, I've got some, there's the Mac. You'll recognize these from historical pictures. But the first Mac had 128K of store. It wasn't expandable. It's extraordinary. This was our product on the Mac. There's a picture of a page. And this is the way, actually, Peter Brown had done his hypertext system. So you click on an article and say that Malaysia MMC Metals, you clicked on that and it's expanded into detail. Or you click on another button and you get a pop-up note. So this was the sort of hypertext system we'd had, and it was, had graphics and so forth in it. So you get your way, navigate your way through documentation in this sort of way. Apple Computers launched a product called HyperCard in August '87. HyperCard, I don't know if any of you know anything about HyperCard, but HyperCard was really an application development kit. It wasn't a hypertext system at all. And as I say, they positioned it immediately over, I mean, they could have, the advertising they did for it, they took 12 pages in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal newspaper, they took a 12-page supplement in the middle of the Wall Street Journal the day they launched the product. And it was all about, Doug Engelbart and Vannevar Bush. And, basically, they'd taken our promotional stuff and they just copied it. And that was bad enough. But the other thing is they gave it away for free. So they said, HyperCard is free. Anytime you buy a Macintosh, you get it bundled with it. But if you want to give it to your friends, do that. If you want to go to an Apple store and ask for a copy, they'll copy it for you. And so forth. So we don't care, it's free, use it and so forth. So it's quite difficult to compete with free. You can have a competitive product, but competing with free is tough. So that was a problem for us, I have to say. But luckily, we had developed a version of our program for the new Microsoft Windows, which had just arrived. And so Microsoft Windows version 1.4 it was, and we had a version for that in August 87. Microsoft Windows 1.4 was the buggiest thing you can imagine. I mean, it's just absolutely dreadful. And, basically you were, beta testing this bloody thing, putting products out in it. But anyway, Apple promoted HyperCard very extensively. If you wanted to do hypertext on anything other than the Macintosh, you needed to buy our product. So that turned out to be quite good for us in practice. By the time we got to later, this is 1990, version 3.1 of our programs, which actually ran on 3.1 of Microsoft Windows. Microsoft Windows was actually not a bad system by 1990. I've got some demonstrations of the product in use, just so you can see it.
One of the problems in dealing with vast quantities of information stored in computers is finding what you're looking for. Well, that's what Guide is all about. With Guide, you can arrange your information into interactive, three-dimensional documents. These documents can be cross-referenced or linked together so that information is combined, sequenced, or manipulated in virtually limitless ways. Links can be placed anywhere within your body of information. They help you organize your data and create a logical path or roadmap for people to follow. The links provide any successive layer of detail you want for your topics. And you can link topics together to show their association. For example, this would be invaluable to someone like a human resources manager who must update and distribute company personnel policies. New employees or anyone else who needed to know about changes in rules and regulations could easily access them from the computer. Here is a training application to give pilots a basic orientation about the systems of a high-performance aircraft. It incorporates written information as well as audio and full-motion video.
These are designed to improve operational capability and flexibility. Directly in front of me is a new wide-angle heads-up display. It provides the pilot with all the flight information and weapons aiming cues he needs to keep his head out of the cockpit and on his target.
Systems are selected from a menu, and sequences can be reviewed in any order or repeated.
The pilot can navigate and deliver weapons by using the infrared imagery displayed on the HUD. Directly below the HUD is the integrated control panel. It's placed for easy upfront access to.
Here's an example of online documentation for a large fleet maintenance garage. The auto maintenance information once stored in hundreds of manuals can now be accessed from a computer station right in the shop. Links provide the mechanic with a way to quickly find information about systems and components. Parts are identified, and diagnostic and repair recommendations are given. And it also links actual audio and video instructions for assembly and service procedures.
Check all fuel connections for external leaks.
So that's the Guide system in action. This is from Tim Berners-Lee's book, Weaving the Web. And so he says, undaunted, he says, in September 1990, Robert Caillou and I went to the European Conference on Hypertext Technology, ECHT, at Versailles to pitch the idea. The conference exhibition was small, but there were a number of products on display, such as a multimedia training manual for repairing a car. You've just seen that, in fact. I approached Ritchie and the folks from OWL Limited, which had a product called Guide. And Peter Brown's original guide work at the University of Southampton, when a user clicked on a hypertext link, the new document would be inserted right there in place. Now, Tim Berners-Lee gets a few things wrong here. The conference wasn't September 1990, it was November 1990. It was November the 30th, 1990. Peter Brown's original guide work at the University of Southampton didn't actually have a hypertext link. This is an interesting point, because Peter Brown has his dynamic documentation, but Peter Brown, being a good computer science professor, thought that go-tos were considered harmful. You all understand go-tos considered harmful. And so he didn't actually have go-tos. He didn't have hypertext links. We had to add the hypertext link, because when we built the commercial product in 1984, 1985, 86, we discovered that it just didn't work without hypertext links. So you had to link from document to document and so forth. So in fact, Peter's original work didn't have a hypertext link, but we put it in. The version now commercialized by OWL looked astonishingly like what I'd envisaged for a web browser. The program that would open and display documents and preferably let people edit them too. All that was missing was the internet. Indeed it was. We had developed our system that ran over networks, commercial networks, but we didn't have access to the internet. The internet was private, and until about 93, 94, the internet was only allowed by publicly funded bodies like education, defense, and government and so forth. So we didn't have access to the internet, unfortunately. Of course, at CERN they had a massive, powerful internet, so it did actually work very well for them. They've already done the difficult bit, he thought, so I tried to persuade them to add an internet connection. They were friendly enough, but they too were unconvinced. I was unconvinced. I was running a commercial company, and CERN didn't have any money. In fact, the great untold secret, nowadays when you see anything from CERN that tells you they were the birthplace of the World Wide Web, when Tim was doing the web, he really didn't have a very comfortable position at CERN. They kept telling him that this is a physics research centre, not a computer science research centre. And if you want to do this work, you should go somewhere else and do it. And eventually he did. He went to MIT. But that's Europe for you. You get fantastic opportunities and you pass them by. CERN was in no position to pay us to do any work. We could easily have done a web browser for the World Wide Web, but we were in no position to do it for free. By that time, I'd sold my company to Panasonic, and I can see my discussion with my masters in Osaka. We're going to do this and give it away, and they're going, yeah, pass that by us again, Ritchie-san. So that was the Tim Berners-Lee thing, and I don't know if any of you have seen my TED talk, but so I took this system to a trade show in Versailles near Paris in late November 1990, and I was approached by a nice young man called Tim Berners-Lee who said, "Are you Ian Ritchie?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I need to talk to you." And he told me about his proposed system called the World Wide Web. And I thought, well, that's kind of a pretentious name, especially if the whole system ran on his computer in his office. But he was completely convinced that his World Wide Web would take over the world one day. And he tried to persuade me to write the browser for it, because his system didn't have any graphics or fonts or layout or anything. It was just plain text. And I thought, well, interesting, but the guy from CERN, he's not going to do this. So we didn't do it. In the next couple of years, the hypertext community didn't recognize him either. In 1992, his paper was rejected for the hypertext conference. In 1993, there was a table at the conference in Seattle, and a guy called Mark Andreessen was demonstrating his little browser for the World Wide Web, and I saw it and I thought, yep, that's it. And the very next year, in 1994, we had the conference here in Edinburgh, and I had no opposition in having Tim Berners-Lee as the keynote speaker. So that puts me in pretty illustrious company. There's a guy called Dick Rowe, who was at Decca Records and turned down the Beatles. There was a guy called Gary Kildall, who went flying his plane when IBM came looking for an operating system for their IBM PC. And he wasn't there, so they went back to see Bill Gates. And the 12 publishers who turned down J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, I guess. On the other hand, there's Mark Andreessen, who wrote the world's first browser for the World Wide Web. And according to Fortune magazine, he's worth $700 million. But is he happy? My mistake was not actually turning down Tim Berners-Lee, because at that time there was no way of, I knew all the hypertext systems in the world, and several of them were much more sophisticated than Tim's. So it was unlikely that Tim was going to succeed. But you never know with these things. My mistake was not doing it later, in 1993, when I saw the web I mean, I knew the web was going to be big in '93, frankly, and we could easily have put together a company that would have done web technologies very easily, and that would have been worth quite a lot of money. Anyway, so summary, I was the world's first hypertext company. We founded in 1984. Why is that going backwards? To do documentations for workstations. We opened our sales marketing office in Seattle in '85. We launched Guide on the Apple Mac in '86. We launched HyperCard in '87. Sorry, Apple launched HyperCard, we launched Guide. We did products for all sorts of people, IBM, Ford, Bell Atlantic. Product was used, we were very early, we were the early publishing version of CNET, Columbia University, the early theological seminary. I sold the company to Panasonic in December 1989. I thought Panasonic would create a Dynabook, would create what today we know as the iPad, you know, a sort of electronic book you carry with you and it will deliver all sorts of documentation. I thought Panasonic would be well placed to do that sort of thing. They were the biggest consumer electronics company on the planet. Unfortunately, they didn't have the vision that we had, and so they didn't do that. The most significant thing that Panasonic did with my company, when you put a DVD into a DVD player and you get up and it says, you know, play the movie or play the highlights or play the trailers or whatever, that all architecture for that that management system is all done by OWL after we sold it to them. So the first things, we launched Hypertext, world's first Hypertext system. We launched the Windows version. We developed a mixed Hypertext system over stored data, CD-ROMs, updates, network connections, and we developed HTML, Hypertext markup language. When I met Tim Berners-Lee, he said, oh, you guys have got a markup language, haven't you? He said, could you send it to me? And I did. And then distributed Hypertext systems over networks. So we did all that. Lessons learned, we raised about 600,000 when we started the company. We sold it for 10 million, so that's quite a good result. But we did sell it too cheap and too early. Netscape was sold for 10 billion later, and they really did the world's first commercial browser. What we probably should have done, we should have switched the headquarters to the USA and raised further funding there with investors that were patient and could see the big picture rather than... Anyway, that's the Hypertext story. I'll just very quickly go through some, because I see later you're doing entrepreneurship. So very, very quickly, how to create your own Silicon Valley startup. You go to Menlo Park, you find a tree, you shake the tree, a venture capitalist will fall out. Before the venture capitalist regains his wits, you recite the following incantation. Internet, enterprise-enabled applications, Java. And the venture capitalist will give you $4 million. In 18 months, you go public. After you receive your check, you go back to Menlo Park, you find a tree, and you climb it and you wait. And that's the, of course, it's a fairy tale, but it does happen. Not quite in 18 months. But it does happen. And actually, there are generations and generations of people, right back to Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, who started Hewlett-Packard, and the 837 or whatever, that have started technology businesses, have made a lot of money, and have gone into funding the next, you know, the next business. This is a map I saw one day when I was actually on a plane. It was an American airline magazine, and I was flicking through it, and it was actually a map. It was an advert for compact computers. Remember compact computers? And it said, now that we're all here, let's get down to business. And the idea is that we've got a global planet, you know, we're all interconnected and so forth, and they've squashed the continents up. And I was looking at this sort of half-heartedly one day, and I thought, you know, that's an odd thing, but Scotland is right in the middle. Of course, in the global world, everything is right in the middle. But it's interesting, you know, that Scotland, and why shouldn't we be, okay? So why shouldn't we be right in the middle? So given that your audience, this audience, is, I thought I'd just very quickly talk about business plans, because you guys are used to writing research papers. And research papers are pages and pages of small grey type with lots of detail. And actually, when you come to writing business plans and going for, you know, funding or whatever, if you're going to talk about that later today, it's very important you understand the difference, because I read a lot of business plans. I get a lot of business plans shown to me. They're usually terrible. I mean, it's the people who are very, very intelligent people, very good communicators and so forth, and they sit down to write a business plan and they write 60 pages of small grey type. It's just awful. So here's my hints. Business plan is really a selling document. It's to describe the potential of what you want to do, state how you'll operate, build confidence in your team. Your team has got to be, you know, a stellar team. Give indicative financials, showing that plans are realistic. The things that most business plans do is they'll say, we're really very, very clever. We're doing some really great technology, and here's a bunch of detailed technology that will make your head spin. We need more money to make more great technology, and there's lots more to be done. And it's such good stuff that somebody will buy it and we'll be rich. And here's some figures our accountants did for us. And people say to me, "Did you like my business plan?" And I say, "Well, yeah, it was interesting." And they say, "What do you think of the figures?" And I say, "I didn't read the figures." I said, "You didn't read the figures?" I said, "No, you break even in month 20, don't you?" And they say, "Oh, how do you know?" Because everybody always breaks even in month 20. If you do a 3-year business plan, and you've got to justify that the value of the company is going to be in profit by year 3, then you break even in month 20. It's inevitable. So all the business plans I've ever seen, they've all had the same graph, and they all break even in month 20. So it's hardly worth even putting the figures in, frankly. So what business plans should do? There's a great new growth market. We've got just the thing for it. It's the kind of thing that a small niche player can sell well. That's really key. Don't do something that Google can do tomorrow. I mean, if it's a big enough market, they'll just do it. They'll squash you. You've got to be something that's niche, that the big guys haven't spotted yet, that run under the radar. The growth potential is such that we can go public or be acquired. And we've got lots, or can get lots, of technical management experience. And who wants to really be a millionaire? Buy a copy of Business Plan Builder for your personal computer, hire an accountant to help write it yourself as best you can, or download a business plan template from the internet, and you can ask a friend, ask the audience, or go 50-50. But I assume most of you by this time have worked out that number 3 is the right one, which is write it yourself as best you can, because you'll be examined on this. Anyway, this is an ideal business. So let's just show you this business. So this is a model of a business, but that's the investment going in. And here's the R&D phase. Very good. And this is the product launch. Excellent. And it's going really well, and that's the exit. Okay? So that's a perfect business. Okay? Never been known to happen. In fact, even this, as you probably worked out, this video was actually, it's not real. I don't know how they did it, but it's not real. Yeah. So can you do this? Can it be done? Well, let me give you some examples of Scottish enterprise in this particular area. Anybody know this guy, Pete Cashmore? Pete Cashmore in 2005, in his parents' house, in his bedroom in his parents' house, started an operation called Mashable.com. Mashable.com has now got, I don't know, 150 journalists based in New York and in San Francisco and in London. They cover the whole field of technology journalism, and many of you know Mashable as a technology site for technology news and so forth. Pete Cashmore is now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He lives in San Francisco, as you can see in that picture in the background. So he doesn't live in Aberdeenshire anymore. But if somebody had said to me in 2005, is it possible to start a new technology blog site and make it really big, I would have gone, you're daft. It's all been done. But anyway, it's amazing. Grand Theft Auto. You all know about Grand Theft Auto. Biggest entertainment product on the planet, done out of Edinburgh. They've just moved into the Scotsman building in Edinburgh. That's a media story for you. The old media is gone and new media's arrived. So Grand Theft Auto, when it comes out, does a $1 billion business in 3 days. Extraordinary stuff. Skyscanner. You know about Skyscanner? Skyscanner is a company in Edinburgh, in Quarter Mile. It's an online flight comparison site. So you go anywhere else, you type in Skyscanner, it tells you the cheapest fares and so forth. Skyscanner is now well over $1 billion, worth well over $1 billion. The last investment they got valued them at $850 million, and that was 3 years ago, and they've grown 40–50% since per year. So they're definitely $1 billion company. The other $1 billion company is this one, FanDuel. Anybody know about FanDuel? FanDuel's a wee Edinburgh company. Well, it was a wee Edinburgh company. In fact, I invested in FanDuel when it was 2 guys in a room in the Appleton Tower. A couple of PhDs from Edinburgh University, and Nigel Eccles, who's in the picture here, he's a maths graduate from St Andrews. They started this company, and they've taken on American fantasy sports. So you gamble your team against other teams, and you either win or you don't, or whatever. And last quarter of 2014, they did $370 million of stake money. They'll do $2 billion this year. They're growing at a factor of 5 a year. It's an extraordinary success story. And they are now a unicorn as well. A unicorn is a company that's less than 10 years old that's worth $1 billion. There's very few of these in the world, and we've got 2 of them in the same building in Quarter Mile. This is Jim Thompson, Cogbooks. Cogbooks is a learning technology, adaptive learning technology company. Won a huge award from the Gates Foundation. We're doing a big project with Arizona State University and Pearson Education. Delta DNA is a games analytic company that started in Edinburgh and they've got a massive presence in LA as well. They're doing fantastic business. TV Squared, Callum Smeaton. Callum Smeaton is a PhD from Heriot-Watt, in fact. He went into entrepreneurship after being a postdoc at Heriot-Watt. What Callum does is he monitors when you respond to an advert and he ties it to the advert. So he finds people who, these days people tend to watch, you know, in the States, cable TV or whatever. They'll see an advert on the telly and it'll be a call to action on the web and they'll just type it in. And so he does that and measures it. And so he gives people very good, very fast feedback of which adverts are working and which are not. You know, it's very important sort of stuff. Craneware, a company in Edinburgh that does, it's the #1 company in the States in health management systems, hospitals and so forth. And the final one, my example, is Minecraft. You'll all know about Minecraft. But the console versions of Minecraft, and these are the most popular ones, PlayStation, Xbox and so forth, are developed in East Lothian by 4J Studios. They're absolutely coining it. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, you kind of expected Minecraft to have its peak and tail off by now, but it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. So that's it. Now, I just want to do a quick plug-in. I don't know if many of you know about the Saltire Foundation. There's two aspects of the Saltire Foundation. I'm a trustee of the Saltire Foundation. We do two things. The Saltire Scholars, we give people internships before their final year at university. So if you know anybody that's going into, well, next year, going into the third year next year, and going into the final year the year after, tell them about this. We've actually taken 150 this year, people, dotted them around the world. You get fantastic experience. It's an internship, a summer internship, but these are really good internships. You know, you get we make sure they're really excellent. In fact, I met a couple of people in San Francisco last week who were the current Saltire scholars over there. They've got, I mean, the opportunities they're being exposed to is just amazing, and it's a great time to do that as you go into your final year. But the one that I want to point out to you guys particularly is the Saltire Fellowship. The Saltire Fellowship is a 9-month program. It starts in September. You go to Babson College in Boston for 3 months. Babson College is the #1 college in the world for entrepreneurship study. You get an intensive entrepreneurship course. I mean, you know, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. type stuff. You also get some internships in Boston at the time. So you do some projects there. You do a study tour, a week in Silicon Valley, a week in Shanghai. And then you come back to Scotland and you get a placement with an internship in Scotland. Fantastic program. They do about 25 of these a year. Now, the bit of news I wanted to give you is that there's actually 2 SICSA places funded right now. It normally costs £28,000 to do a Saltire Foundation. But unfortunately, this runs out very quickly. So you'd have to decide this weekend. Okay, but if you think this might be something for you, and I would strongly recommend it. I mean, it's an extraordinarily powerful program. You'd have to apply this weekend for the Saltire Foundation. But there are some SICSA funded places, and they'll just lapse unless they're taken up. So if you're thinking about, you know, potentially being an entrepreneur and getting into business and so forth, have a look at the Saltire Foundation, the Saltire Fellowship. Okay, I think that's it. We'll have to start somewhere. That happens to be Bill Hewlett's garage, where Hewlett-Packard started. And you know, here in Scotland, we've got facilities as good as this. That's it.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have some questions for Ian? Yes.
Hello, thank you very much for your speech. And I have following question asked in a little bit provocative manner. So, why did the idea of hypertext fail?
Why did it fail?
Yes, I mean, like we have all the internet. We have like wonderful Twitter. We can download comments inside the page. Yeah. But basically, everything we write, like books, papers, everything we do is PDF. I mean, PDF is a plain old paper just in computer.
Yeah.
We don't see dynamic text pretty much. Their amount doesn't really increase with the time. We don't see dynamic books. We don't see dynamic manuals. If we read a difficult paper, we can't click on the sentence to get more information about it in place. Yeah. Basically, what we're doing is the same library search as we did like 20 years ago. Yeah. Why?
I don't know, actually. I really don't know. I'm very puzzled with that. No, I gave a keynote talk at the Hypertext.
I'm so sorry, the guide system was kind of, in the advertisement, looked like this, not like pages with links between them.
The guide system was really dynamic documentation. I mean, it was proper hypertext, yeah. And it did have the hypertext link, but it also had, and what we call stretch text was our basic concept. And that was Peter Brown's idea. And for some reason, I mean, you can simulate stretch text very easily on the web, and some documents do it, but it's not commonly done. You're quite right. Actually, I did a keynote speech at the Hypertext conference in 1992 in Milan, and I described, I didn't know where it was all going to go, but I described the canal industry and how they developed all these technologies for the canal industry. And the canal industry was wiped out when railways arrived. And I said, we're building the canals at the moment. You know, we're going to get wiped out when the real thing arrives. And I didn't know it was going to be the web, but it was the web in practice. So why didn't they do it? I don't know. I really don't know. It's probably trickier to do it that way. I don't know. I suppose if people, because PDF documents can have embedded links, you can go from, so you can do the hypertext stuff. And essentially that's what Vannevar Bush was talking about, is working your way through a library. But you're absolutely right. I mean, a proper dynamic document that has real structure and so forth is much more valuable. And you do get that. I mean, you do. These days, it's mostly you're interrogating data, and your vision of the data is via a web page. And so when you click, you get the underlying data and so forth. But nobody structures documents the way that we did. And yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why. Probably just more difficult to do. Or maybe it's just because the web didn't really, they didn't have stretch text type technology built into it.
Hi. Thanks very much for the talk. And I wanted to ask you a question about FanDuel, specifically, just as an example, because I'd literally never heard of them until Monday. Yeah. And I'm at the University of St Andrews, and these are graduates at the University of St Andrews.
Well, Nigel was, yeah.
Yeah. And they bought me lunch on Monday just because they sponsored an event we were holding. Right. I didn't know anything about it. And I saw it, and I thought, is it okay to eat lunch when you have no idea what this is? And then, they're this enormous thing. Yeah. So the question I've got, and you said you invested in them, so the question is, when you saw the business plan or whatever it was, what made you think, oh yeah, this could be a thing, as opposed to, they're crazy? Yeah.
The business plan for FanDuel was absolute pants. It was terrible. So Nigel Eccles, after his master's degree at Edinburgh, went to work for McKinsey's for a couple of years. He then went to work for a company that became part of a Betfair or Sporting Bet, one of these online betting type companies. And then he worked for publishing companies, and he ended up with Johnson Press in Edinburgh running Scotsman.com. So he was obviously a bright guy. He'd done maths at St Andrews. That was a good start. He'd then done McKinsey's. McKinsey's is a fantastic training ground for business. They get thrown into all sorts of situations. And so McKinsey's alumni are very special people. And then he had the betting, online betting experience, and he had the publishing experience. And the two PhDs he had with him, Tom and the other guy, they were very bright guys. They'd actually done some entrepreneurial things themselves, but they'd abandoned those to join with Nigel and set up, it wasn't called FanDuel, it was called HubDub. And it was a news prediction site. And at that time, the question was whether Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama was going to be the candidate for the Democrat. And they would do things like, who thinks it's going to be one or the other, and they would do tie-ins with newspapers, and it was just a terrible idea. It really was. And but I invested because of the team, absolutely because of the team. I thought this team is fantastic. It's miraculous. And I'm also on the board of Pentec Venture Capital, and they came to pitch to us. And as they left the room, we all looked at each other and said, "What a terrible idea, but a great team." And we invested in the team. So it's very much a matter of backing the team. What Nigel did was he actually read the federal legislation which outlawed online gambling in the States, the 2005 legislation. He read it and he found there was a specific exclusion for fantasy sports. And he thought, ooh, that's interesting. We could do that. He then went to 90 different venture capitalists in the States, and he got turned down by 8 to 9 of them. But one, luckily, came on board, because the Americans are very sensitive, and they all thought this might be online gambling, you know, it might be made illegal or whatever. But anyway, it hasn't been so far. And so they've gone into this fantasy sports. They were number one in that. They're still number one. They've got 3/4 of the market. Their biggest competitor is called DraftKings. It's got 1/3 of their business. And they've just been backed by the Walt Disney Company and Fox. So they've got ESPN, Walt Disney owns ESPN and Fox behind them. And Nigel's company's got Universal Studios and Comcast. Comcast, the parent of Universal Studios and NBC. So we've got NBC Sports in our team, basically. And it's going like an absolute fair. It's going fantastically well. So their business is growing at a factor of 5 a year. And they'll do $2 billion worth of business this year. And they'll float in a couple of years' time for a lot of money. So it's a great story. Yeah, should claim them quickly. But the reason they were at St Andrews, obviously, is they now require engineers. And they're hiring engineers, and it's beginning to be a bit of a problem in Edinburgh, because Skyscanner and Fangio pop in and hire 10 engineers from your company, and suddenly you've lost 10 engineers. You've gone across the road. Yeah, it's fine, good.